Stargazing Hill by S.R. Martin. Chapter 4. The sun had not reached its zenith when they spotted a single man in the colorful garb of the mercenaries coming their way in great haste. They hurried to meet him and soon recognized Leonard, his face shining with sweat, a haunted look in his eyes. He came alone, without any pack and even without a spear.
"Turn around! Turn back to the portal!" he called between ragged breath as he drew near. "We have to get out of here!"
He almost collapsed into Kat's arms when they reached him. She propped him up by the shoulder, and Heinrich handed him a water skin. The exhausted man drank in deep gulps, even as he tried to catch his breath. "What happened? Where are the others?" Heinrich asked, when Leonard handed the skin back to him. The man looked back towards the hill, checking if someone or something was still following him, even though no living thing could be seen on the windswept steppes.
"We were attacked at night. Men in dark plate armor. Demons, their eyes glowing with a ghostly light. They struck without warning, clapping down men with bone cudgels. We tried fighting them. We were caught with our pants down. It was utter chaos. Barely got away with my life," he told them, his eyes wide, darting left and right at the recollection.
Cudgels, Heinrich wondered. Were they taken prisoners? What about the astrologers? Did they take them? Leonard looked at him stupefied, trying to make sense of his words. When understanding dawned, he shook his head violently.
"No, everyone's dead. It was a massacre. We have to get away. Back to the portal. Back to our world."
"I thought they were using clubs, not spears or swords." He grabbed Leonard by the collar and shook him. "What is it, man?"
"There were demons, I tell you. Everyone is dead."
Terror was written in the veteran's face when he answered, but he could not meet the white man's stern gaze.
"Even if they were taken prisoner, surely they are dead by now."
Heinrich let go of him, letting him slump onto Kat's shoulder, and stepped past him. He shielded his eyes with his hand and stared towards the lone hill, trying to make out anything, but was impossible at the distance.
"Captain, what are we going to do?"
Kat asked with deep worry. Leonard shook his head and took a moment to steady himself.
"We retreat. Back to the portal, then back to Ambeck," he said.
Heinrich stepped past him with a dismissive grunt, began taking his weapons and essential equipment off one of the mules, belted his quiver, looped a small water skin around his belt, and lastly took his machine bow in his hand. "We're not getting paid if you don't bring the clients back alive. I'm going back to the hill," he declared, his jaw tense, but his voice unwavering.
"You must be moon-judged. You're not getting paid if you're dead,"
Leonard retorted. The white man shrugged. "Maybe so. Either way, I'm going." He looked at Kat. Eyes were darting from him to Leonard, from the mules and the portal woods to the hill. He put a hand on her shoulder. "If you want to help, go through the portal with the mules. Find a good hiding spot and wait there, but not for more than a day and a night. If we don't catch up with you by then, we are dead." He took off his silver white man's amulet, 2 arrows crossed in front of a signal horn, and handed it to her. "Do me a favor and bring this to the Loge. Tell them what happened here, so others will be aware of the danger." She took the trinket in her open hand, stared at it for a moment, then looked up, searching for his eyes, but he had already set up with long strides. Heinrich's long and efficient steps made short work of the distance. He never looked back, his eyes focused on the hill, growing in the distance, watching for any movement. He had almost covered the first mile when he heard a call from behind.
"Wait! Wait!"
He stopped and turned, and his eyes widened in wonder when he saw Kat running up to him, spear in hand. "I'm coming with you," she exclaimed when she got up with him. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Your captain's going the other way." Cat frowned bitterly and looked at the ground. Then she shook her head, set her jaw and looked up, determination burning in her eyes. "Leonard can handle the mules on his own, but you'll need all the help you can get." Heinrich wanted to protest, send her back to the portal, back to life, but eventually he nodded, slowly first, then with more conviction. "You're right, I'll need your help. More important, our friends need help. They have a better chance if you are coming with me, small as it may be." Cat forced a smile and punched him on the arm. "That's the positive thinking I like so much about you." She stepped past him, towards the lone hill. "Come on now, we are wasting daylight." Without heavy luggage and loaded beasts of burden to slow them down, they made haste, and the hill soon grew at the horizon and towered once more above the plains as they drew near. Still, they could spot no movements, no lights, not even a wisp of smoke. When they snuck up the winding path, the sun was nearing the horizon. They still had not seen any signs of life. Only when they reached the expedition's campsite on the slope of the hill did they find the aftermath of the attack. Tents were torn down, bags and casks of supplies torn open, their contents spilled on the ground. Yet there were no bodies laying anywhere, no signs of the attackers themselves. Heinrich picked up a broken spear shaft, its upper half and bronze tip missing, and used it to fashion a short spear by mounting his hollow-handled white man's knife. "There's nothing here. It's like they've been swallowed by the earth," Cat lamented, picking through the remains of the astrologer's tent. "They took even the books and scrolls," she said. "Even the big telescope and its mount is missing. It only found a single bloodstain, barely large enough to account for a scratch," Heinrich replied. "What now?" she asked. "We follow the footprints," Heinrich said, pointing toward the path down the hill. The expedition members had created a footpath over the days of their stay. Cat moved to where he was pointing, but could only shake her head. "And those our footprints?" "Most of them," Heinrich agreed. He stepped beside her and pointed out several prints that were slightly different from the rest. "See these? They are wider, deeper, come from boots without heels. Let's see where they lead us." His makeshift spear in one hand, his bow in the other, he led the way up the hill, down the other side, the weather-facing side they had shunned when pitching their camp. "You're not really doing this for the coins, are you?" Cat asked as they began descending. He looked back over his shoulder and studied her face for a moment. "You mean what I told Leonard? That we are not getting paid if we don't bring the client home?" he asked, and she nodded. He grimaced. "I thought that line of reasoning would convince a mercenary to stand his ground," he explained. Cat puffed out her cheeks. "Aren't white men basically mercenaries as well? Don't you offer your services for coin like us?" He shrugged. "Maybe so, and clearly not all mercenaries are like that." He smiled at her, and the remark managed to dispel her misgivings. "Why not decide for yourself? Come visit the white man's lodge in Ambeck when we are back. You might like what you find." She considered his words a few moments as they picked their way through the boulders and moss-covered rubble, following the now obvious track. "Will you be there?" she eventually asked. "At least my amulet will be, waiting for a new bearer," he replied in a quiet tone, more speaking to himself than answering her question. "Hush now," he whispered, putting a finger to his lips, pointing forwards into the shadow of a large angular boulder. Rocks, dirt, and grass were strewn around the rock. Cat strained her eyes, and hidden in the shadow she could make out a gaping hole, leading down into the hill itself. They snuck up on the entrance and peered in through the dark, but the fading light of the setting sun was quickly swallowed, and they could not see further than a few steps. listening, sniffing. He brushed his hand against the wall and rubbed the dirt between his fingers. Cat tapped him on the shoulder and shot him a questioning glance. Heinrich grimaced, then rummaged in his belt pouch, pulled out a cloth containing a handful of black berries. "Nightshade," he whispered. "Squeeze the juice into your eyes, wash it out with water right away. Your vision may get blurry, but it will help you see in the dark." He took 2 berries from the cloth and offered the rest to her.
"Shouldn't we light a lamp?"
Cat hushed as she followed his lead and also took 2 berries. Heinrich shook his head. "That much light will give us away. We don't have a thief's hooded lantern, and I suspect even that would be too much." He squeezed the berries between 2 fingers into his eyes, flinched and squinted, then quickly washed the juice out with water from his skin. Cat gave the berries one more doubtful look, and glanced back over her shoulder towards the forest on the far horizon. Then she sighed and did as the white man had shown her, clenching her teeth and stifling a curse as the poisonous juice stung in her eyes. After cleaning their eyes, they did not wait for the poison to take effect, but felt their way into the dark with hands on walls and spear butt carefully prodding the ground ahead. In places, there was rubble on the ground where the stone ceiling had once caved in. But what might have been a narrow passage, just wide enough to allow a scrawny astrologer to wriggle through, had been cleaned up and widened enough for warriors in armor to pass. Soon they reached a winding flight of stairs that led them deeper into the hill. As they shuffled down, step by step, the nightshade began to take effect. They could make out the shapes of the surrounding walls, smooth, angular. The walls didn't run upwards at right angles, but converged above them, each layer of the masterfully hewn stones coming closer together in small steps until they met in an arched ceiling. The deeper they went, the older and more stale the air became. But once the stairwell had turned them around once, they hesitated and sniffed. There was a fresh smell of iron in the air. Blood had been spilled. Heinrich held in, sniffing, listening. After a moment he turned to Cat.
"Take off your boots,"
he whispered.
"Hobnails are bad for sneaking."
She nodded, quickly slid out of her boots, bound them together by their straps before securing them to her belt. Now, even more careful and quiet, they continued, and the smell became ever stronger, and they had the impression of walking into an abattoir. Eventually, the staircase landed them in a large, 6-sided chamber. They edged to the doorway carefully, listening intently, staring into the dark to make out any soldiers or traps that might have been left behind to guard this entrance. By now, the effect of the nightshade had grown stronger and stranger than what the white man had expected. They could not only make out the contours of the walls, but see as if the chamber were infused with a faint, cold light, a glow that came from 8 glyph-inscribed crystals sitting in scones in the corners of the room. It gave them the impression that they were seeing the ghost of a magical fire that had once burned in these crystals. But Cat was not sure if she had not preferred to continue on in darkness, for that would have spared her the sight they now beheld. In the middle of the room stood a 6-sided stone altar, with glowing channels running from its center down its side where they vanished into holes in the floor. The altar was smeared in fresh blood, and the channels were stained dark and had run down. On the altar still lay the last victim of a gruesome rite, while the others were strewn about the room, cast aside without a care once they had been drained of their lifeblood. In death, their faces were frozen in mindless terror, their flesh shrunken and their eyes hollow, suggesting that more than blood had been drained from their bodies during a terrible ceremony of dark magic. Cat felt her gut wrench. His skin ran hot and cold. She put a hand over her mouth, trying not to throw up. She had seen death, and the death of people close to her before, but this was beyond anything she could have conjured up in her wildest nightmares. She swayed, but Heinrich caught her with an arm around the waist and steadied her.
"We're too late,"
she gasped, trying to swallow a lump in her throat.
"Yeah,"
the white man growled, grabbing his spear tighter, and his knuckles showed white.
"It's all my fault,"
someone sobbed, making them jump and ready their weapons. Now their eyes were drawn to a cell, little more than a cage, set into one of the walls to their right. Someone sat in the back of the cell, hugging her knees to her body. Asteropa looked forlorn, clothes torn, her dirt-caked pale skin in stark contrast to the dark stone of the walls, making her appear like a ghost. Cat dashed to the cell and grabbed onto one of the dark iron bars.
"Thank Muhota, you're alive."
"And I wish I was dead," Asteropa sobbed, raising her head from her knees to look up, though she looked past Cat left and right, her eyes unable to pierce the darkness. Her face was matted with dust. Streaks ran down her cheeks from her dark ringed eyes, but by now she had run out of tears.
"I had to watch as they sacrificed the others. One by one, they dragged them onto that altar and carved out their beating hearts with a wicked knife. They robbed them not only of their blood and life, but their souls too, to fuel their dark magic and make more of them. Soon they will come for me, and I will share in their fate."
Cat reached with her arm through the bars, but could not reach her.
"You're not dead yet. We'll get you out of here."
Asteropa struggled to get up onto her knees and reached toward the mercenary's voice. She waved her hands in the direction and eventually found her hand. She held onto it with both hands and pulled it close to her chest. The astrologer shook her head.
"You can. The door is locked, and the guard took the keys when they went below. You have to get out of here before they return. If you want to do me a kindness, leave me a knife so I can slit my throat. Better to die quickly by my own hand than suffer as fuel for the hideous rituals."
Heinrich walked up to Cat and examined the bars. They were hexagonal, thick as a finger, wrought from steel or iron, dark from age, crusted with rust. "There's still time. I can break these and set you free," he exclaimed, handed Cat the cloth with the nightshade berries and his water skin, then turned to gather tools. "Tell us what happens while I work on these bars." Hope began to dawn on the astrologer's face. She gathered her courage and crawled up to the bars, reaching out for Cat, who grabbed her hand and guided it to her face.
"Don't worry. The old man is surprisingly deft with his hands. He'll have you out of there in no time,"
the mercenary said with a frail smile. "I'm not," Heinrich growled, leaning beside one of the bodies. "I'm experienced."
"That too,"
Cat admitted wryly. She opened the cloth, got 2 berries, and put them into Asteropa's hands.
"Here, take these. Squeeze them into your eyes. Rush the juice out with water from the skin." "Is that nightshade?"
the astrologer wondered.
"This will not do much in this total darkness."
"You'll be surprised," Heinrich replied. "Plants growing in the wood often pick up some of the strange magic of these woods, especially those growing near a portal." He had pulled the belt of the dead mercenary and proceeded to unbuckle the belt from a second. "I think the poison is letting us see residual magic," he explained. "Or maybe I'm hallucinating as I lay dying at the entrance. One or the other," he added dryly. Asteropa nodded and did as Cat had instructed. Wincing as the sour juice burned in her eyes. And once she had washed her eyes out, still blinking and hoping for the promised effect, she began recounting what had happened since the others had left the camp.